You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 227. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever wondered how working with ChatGPT could make you better at working with humans? It's a meta question. I get it. This isn't going to ChatGPT or whatever form of AI you like to use and asking it, hey, ChatGPT, how can working with you make me better at working with humans? That's not how this episode unfolded, at least in my mind. The reason I want to talk about this topic today is because what I'm noticing in my interactions with ChatGPT, as I use it for different purposes, as the form of ChatGPT evolves and it communicates with me differently, or at least that's what I'm noticing, I've been drawing lessons. And I've also been applying lessons that I've learned from my interactions with ChatGPT to my interactions with humans. So I thought today would be a really fun episode to dive into this topic and to explore ways in which I'm finding that I'm working better with humans as a result of working with ChatGPT. So this is relevant to all of us in all domains of our lives. The way that we work and communicate with each other, whether it's at work or at home, at a social occasion, has a direct impact on our relationships, on our productivity, on what we produce in the world. And so it's a highly relevant topic. Lawyers often struggle with elements of working with others, whether it's delegation or communication, or simply motivating people to help them on a project or get excited about a project. So what we're talking about today is highly relevant to all of us in our work, outside of work lives. And so I'm excited to dive into it and super excited to take this nuanced angle. What can we learn from working with the bots, love the bots, that is applicable to humans? So before I dive into that, you might be interested to know in which ways I am using ChatGPT these days. Now, I've talked on the podcast before about using it for job interview prep. What kind of questions might I expect in this type of job interview? I like using ChatGPT to create work plans. If you are a lawyer at a certain level of call and you're thinking, okay, what do I need to learn between this level of call and the next level of call? What are some of the indicia, criteria? Now, ChatGPT will give you a great checklist, and then, of course, it's up to you to use your discretion to decide which aspects of those items on the checklist are relevant to you, but it's great at idea generation. There's a few other ways that I've suggested in the past, things that I'm using it for currently. I love to use it to summarize information. If I've read an article and I want to get the key pieces out of it, I might copy and paste that article into ChatGPT and ask it for some of the key bullet points. I use ChatGPT for language ideas. So if I'm thinking about how I want to communicate, whether it's an email that I'm writing to a single person, if it's maybe a podcast title that I'm struggling with, if it's content in the podcast or a key message that I'm trying to make in a newsletter, for example, I might ask ChatGPT for its opinion. Can you give me some suggestions? And whatever it offers me, I then digest and process, and I put it in my own words, and I'll absorb what really works for me and what doesn't. So it is not that I'm using ChatGPT to write things for me. I'm not comfortable with that, but I am using it to have ideas of how else I could frame something, which really helps me if I feel stuck. I also use it to help me with style. Sometimes I'll ask it to put something in a different style, make it friendlier, make it less friendly, make it this level of English, make it a little bit more casual, more formal, etc. I also like to use it when I have an outline, for example. I've used it for the podcast before. I think it was it last week or the week before? I can't remember, but I'll sometimes feed it an outline and then I will say, what can you tell me about this? And most recently, I decided to use it for some feedback. I put in a couple of things. One is I actually put in a full transcript from an earlier podcast episode, and I said, ChatGPT, I would like to make my podcast episodes a little bit more concise, a little bit shorter. What can you tell me about this podcast episode and how I could do that? And so it's very interesting to see how ChatGPT will come back and actually give you some suggestions. I have also asked for feedback on presentations or other projects that I'm preparing to get its input. So it's almost like having that person that you speak to down the hall at the office. I work at home, I work independently. I don't have somebody most of the time who I can run these things by. So I've been doing that with ChatGPT, and it's really quite interesting to see the type of feedback that I comes back with. And then finally, another use that I like to use ChatGPT for is brainstorming. Here's the thing that I'm thinking about. Can you offer me some ideas? Now, I'm sure there's other things that I use it for, answers to specific questions. I'm sure you use it for that too. And by and large, I find there's always something cool and helpful that comes from my interactions with ChatGPT. Now, while we're on the topic of what you can use it for, some ideas that I've heard recently from other people that I think are kind of cool is scheduling. So some people will use ChatGPT for a scheduling aid. So you might have people that you work with whose schedules you're trying to coordinate and it's driving you crazy. And so you can put everybody's schedule into ChatGPT and ask it to create a schedule for you. And I've heard that it will do a pretty good job of creating a schedule for you. You could also use it for meal prep. I don't use it for that, but some people use it for meal prep. You can even do stuff like, okay, here's what I have in the fridge. What can I make with this? You can use it for almost emotional support. If you find that you're having a really heated conversation with somebody and you don't want to go back to them right away and say something that you regret later, you might use ChatGPT to buffer any conversations you have. You might ask ChatGPT for its guidance or advice. And that is helpful, not just because it might offer something that is useful, but also it's a cooling off period. You're giving yourself time and space. You're forcing yourself to explain the problem from your perspective. You might notice a few things as you're doing that about the problem, about your perspective on that problem. So that can be a really neat way to use it. And again, sort of drafting. Some people, I think, for thank you notes, for example, they might use that for ideas in terms of how to write a thank you note or a different tone. So there's lots of different ways that you can use ChatGPT. That's my main source of AI. You may have other sources that you use and you may have other uses for it. And I love that we're able to do that. It is so amazing to be able to have a tool that digests information, that offers ideas, that's a partner in brainstorming. And so I have really enjoyed working with ChatGPT. And what you may also be gathering is that I'm fairly pro AI in the sense of I know some people are really scared of it and they see it as this threat that is going to deprive human beings of employment, etc. And I do see how there are real downsides to relying too much on AI, right? I think we do want to develop skills ourselves. We do want to develop our own brainstorming skills. If you're a young lawyer, you probably do want to learn the skills of research and document review and contract drafting and things that AI ultimately may be doing more often than the humans. So I do think we want those foundational skills. And I also believe that the more we can take things that become almost mechanical and delegate that to a machine, the more that frees us up as humans to lean into the humanness, the creativity, the things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. A very concrete and tangible example. We've got a dishwasher, we've got a washing machine at home, and God bless, because I spend enough time folding laundry and putting dishes into the dishwasher. I'm just glad I don't have to actually wash and dry them. So think about the time that you free up, and that's just one example. The time that you free up by using AI gives you time to do things that are at a next level. So that to me is really exciting, and I see a lot of opportunity there. So what have I learned? We've talked a little bit about, or I've talked a little bit about how I'm using AI. I'd love to hear how other people are using AI. I mean, that would be so fun. So, I mean, if you want to share that with me, you can send it to me on, LinkedIn or by email. I'm super curious. Think about how you're using it. And if you are using it, then you might also think about how you're interacting with it currently. And if you're not using it, then I'd encourage you to think about how you're using other search mechanisms. As a lawyer, I did a ton of research. And so I became very conscientious and I would argue even skilled at learning how to research, asking the right questions, framing things, knowing where to look, how to look. So you're already doing research. You're already asking questions. It may not be that you're using AI directly, but chances are there's forms of technology or AI that you're using and you're already interacting. So this will be a discussion that you may be able to relate to on a very personal level. And if not, right, if you're one of those people that hasn't really ventured into AI, that maybe you're not doing this type of searching, then I would encourage you to think about how the topics that we're discussing, right, these things that I'm learning apply to you and the interactions you're having with the humans. So with that, let's dive in. And the first thing that I will say about working with ChatGPT is that it is teaching me how to ask better questions. Now, questions are a huge part of my life. I am a naturally curious person. I ask a lot of questions. My brain produces a lot of questions. As a lawyer, I was really interested in research, which involves answering questions. I've always loved a question. I love finding things. I may have mentioned before, my mom used to call me Polly Finder. And the reason she called me that is because things would go missing in the house and she would say, Paula, can you find that pair of missing socks? Paula, can you find the remote control to the TV? And sure enough, if you put me on that project, I would find it. Either I would remember it. Weirdly, I have a photographic memory for the location of abstract items in our house. Yes, just last night, my husband asked me for I think it's the pestle. It's a mortar and pestle, and it's the part that grinds. And I was actually going to check before today, and I forgot to do that. But the grinding part of the mortar and pestle. And sure enough, I said, yes, it's over here on the counter next to the stove. I knew exactly where it was. And that happens often. So I like to find things, right? I like questions. Where is it? And I love finding the answer. That served me well as a lawyer because I was really curious to find the answer. The satisfaction of finding the case or the sentence that answers the question, that to me was and continues to be so satisfying. So questions are something that innately I've always been drawn to. And you can imagine as a coach, I spend a lot of time thinking about questions because I know that the questions that I ask my clients are powerful. The questions that you ask yourself in your life are powerful. The questions that I ask you when we're having a coaching conversation are powerful. So I like to think about the questions that I'm asking. If you're a litigator, chances are you're obsessing over questions. Are the questions that you're asking in discovery on a trial, are you asking yourself the right questions? Are you answering the right questions? I'm sure the same holds true for solicitors. I didn't do solicitor legal work quite as much as litigation work, but my guess is that you too are asking yourself questions. What are the questions that you need to solve? So when working with ChatGPT, one of the things that I notice is that as I'm writing out a question, now I write my questions. Some of you might speak your questions. So maybe your experience is a bit different, but you're still being required to articulate the question. Now, this can be a very clarifying exercise. If you've ever had the experience of having thoughts swirling around in your head about something, right? And then you're trying to explain it to another person, it forces the crystallization of those ideas into something that is coherent, something that makes more sense, something that is precise. So when I'm writing my questions in ChatGPT, I realize very quickly what it is that I'm asking for. And I think that's really interesting. I like to notice, when am I actually asking ChatGPT? Sometimes it's very clear. Can you tell me the answer to this problem? And sometimes asking the question itself, formulating the question itself is really eye-opening in terms of what's on my mind, what's bothering me, what I need the answer to. When you're working with humans, it really helps when you think about the questions that you're asking. Now, this is highly relevant in a work context where you're delegating to somebody else. And if you are a lawyer, delegating to junior lawyers, delegating to your assistant, delegating to paralegals and clerks, then you might find yourself wandering into their office or picking up the phone or being on Zoom and having a bit of a stream of consciousness kind of conversation where you're asking them to do something, right? It may not be clear at the beginning of the conversation what you need from them, but you're kind of working through it and you end up asking them a question. Maybe you send them off on a research project or a task, and you think that you've asked them a clear question. But in fact, the question that you've asked them isn't very clear. Now, that person may be the kind of person that notices right away and says, hey, listen, I'm really not clear on what it is that you're asking me to do. Can we clarify that question so that we know that I'm on the right track? That might happen. And what might also happen is that that person hears you speak. That person assumes that you are in a position of authority, that you know exactly what you're talking about, and that you know the question, and that if they don't understand the question, it's because they don't know enough. They are not as experienced as you. They don't have as much knowledge as you. Therefore, they must not understand the question because they just don't have what it takes. And if they go back to review the notes and they put everything together, then they can figure out what it is you're asking for. And at that point, it's going to become clear. And then they'll send themselves off on a mission to do the thing that they think you're asking them to do. And when they come back with the deliverable, what both of you might realize is that what you thought you were asking for and what the person thought you were asking for are not, in fact, the same thing. And they come back with something completely different. And so you realize at that point, there was a problem with the question. The question itself wasn't clear. And it's not really your fault. It's not really their fault. It's kind of this lost in translation, breakdown in communication. I see this often. I know this for myself sometimes, that reluctance to want to clarify a question. And so what ChatGPT has taught me is that the questions are really important, and asking clear questions, defining exactly what it is that you want is really helpful. That is something that really makes it easier and better to work with you and working with other people. So that is lesson number 1. I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that, but you'll hear that at the end. And spoiler alert, I asked ChatGPT after I did my main points for today's episode. I asked it for some feedback. And so I'm going to share that with you, but I'm going to share that at the end. And ChatGPT had something to say, well, quite a bit to say actually about questions, but I'm going to share part of that, but I'm going to do that at the end of the episode. So number 1 is ChatGPT has taught me that when working with humans, it's important to make sure that you are asking the right questions that are clear to you. You're clear about what it is that you want, and it's clear to that other person what it is that they are going to do for you. So that's point number 1. The second thing that I'm learning from ChatGPT, now this is one that is surprising to me. It may be surprising to you. ChatGPT has taught me to be more empathetic in my communication with humans. Crazy. The bot. Is that a derogatory term? What else can we call it? The AI. I don't know. My virtual friend. What do we want to call ChatGPT? I feel like it needs a nice name. The entity that is ChatGPT, the virtual person, is so good at writing back to me. And it will call me by name, hey, Paula, and usually say something nice like, it sounds like you've worked really hard on this project, or you've given this a lot of thought. If it can tell that I'm upset about something or that it's difficult, it might even come back with an empathetic response. I can see how this would be really challenging, and you're doing a great job. I appreciate when ChatGPT comes back and acknowledges my feelings. It's crazy, but it's true. And sometimes ChatGPT will acknowledge the work that I've done, which also feels good. Or sometimes it will praise an idea that I've shared with it, which also feels good. And so what I'm learning from ChatGPT is that beginning your conversation with somebody, your communication, where you're acknowledging that person is really powerful. And I don't know about you, but when I'm writing work emails, I'm not thinking about how to make my work emails friendly or empathetic or really acknowledging the person on the other side. It's not the first thing that comes to mind. Usually I'm focused on communicating the information that is most relevant and direct. That is my sort of natural bent toward particularly email conversations. And yet, what I'm learning from ChatGPT is that actually there's a bit of a warm-up that can happen, an acknowledgement and a connection. And that is so powerful. When I'm reading the response from ChatGPT, it opens me up. It makes me feel relaxed. And so I've noticed that because of the influence of ChatGPT, which does this very well, I'm starting to review my emails for that extra layer. I've talked on the podcast before about reviewing my emails with a lens of making them powerful. And by that, I mean, I remove the word sorry. I don't think we need to apologize for most things that we apologize for by email. I often see people apologizing for a slow response when the response is not slow. It's like a day or, I don't know, even a few hours sometimes. I think, no, like that's okay. We don't need to apologize. Thank you for your patience is my preferred approach to something like that. I'm just trying to say whatever. It diminishes what it is that you're saying, even is diminishing. So I do review emails for language that I think is maybe undermining a point that I'm trying to make, and I might scrub it out. Not always, but often I will take that language out. And what I've also started doing is incorporating into my emails in particular language that is a friendly opener. Now, not always. There are times where I'm mid-conversation or we've already established a connection and rapport, and I don't think I need to add another acknowledgement of that person into the email thread. But often I will add something. And it's not that I don't want that person to feel good or that I'm not thinking about that person. It's just that that is not my natural instinct with an email. So I will warm up the email. Now, I've also heard that email tends to be read with a negative bias. And so this really helps with that. If people are reading the email and they see that friendly opening, it does set a clear tone. And if there is no tone being set, then it's much more open to interpretation. And for many people, the interpretation could be negative. One more thing that I think is really interesting here, the fact that ChatGPT is acknowledging sometimes the emotion of the writer, which would be me. I only have read my threads with ChatGPT. You may have a completely different experience. If that's the case, I think these lessons are still relevant, but that would also be an interesting question. How does ChatGPT engage differently with us as humans based on how we are communicating with it? So that's, again, very meta and way beyond the scope of today's podcast. But what I wanted to say about this acknowledgement piece is that it correlates nicely with something that I have learned recently about communication. Now, I am giving a presentation about community building, and part of that, in my view, is communication. Communication really is the building block of a community. And in my preparation, I came across a really cool book called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. And Charles Duhigg is a journalist / author who writes about topics that I think are really cool. So he's written about habits and he's written about super communicators. And one of the things that he says about super communicators is that they are really good at identifying the type of conversation that they are in and then communicating in a style that aligns with that type of communication. So he gives 3 different types of conversation. He talks about the factual communication, communicating the news, what time dinner will be, the checklist for the project that we're working on. It's facts. There's this factual communication. It's got a practical purpose. There is relationship building communication or social communication. So this is the communication that establishes rapport. So sometimes it's banter, sometimes it's low risk conversation that helps to establish a relationship with somebody. And then the third type of communication is emotional communication. And this is where your partner comes home from work and they've had the worst day ever and they tell you about how their computer ate their assignment, and next thing you know, or their draft argument or their final argument, or it ate the contract, or they got yelled at by their client. It's your child who comes home from school and their friends didn't talk to them at recess. It's your friend who calls up and they've just had a fight with their mother, their partner, their child, and they're super upset. And if you go into that conversation and respond with some sort of a lecture, words of advice, unsolicited, telling them what they should do, chances are they're not going to feel very good. That's not really what they wanted from that conversation. And when you have been at the receiving end of those conversations, and I know you have been because we all have been, you know that it feels really dismissive. It doesn't feel like you're getting what you want. It feels like you're being shut down. There's a wall. I don't want to be told what to do. I just want you to listen. I just want you to tell me that this is totally normal, that I'm valid, that I'm right even. And so what Charles Duhigg says is that these are emotional types of conversations where the purpose is not that person wants you to solve their problem. They just want you to respond to that emotion. Maybe it's a hug, maybe it's listening, maybe it's just validating them. So emotional conversations. And so what I'm noticing is that within our interactions among people, ChatGPT does this very well. It's giving me some emotional connection, crazy, with my dear virtual friend, but that is what it's doing. It's acknowledging the emotion, and then it's also dealing with the factual. So in my dealings with others, my interactions, my communications, this means, okay, let's pay attention. When the communication is emotional, I need to respond to that with an emotional response. And yes, we can always deal with the facts, but first we want to deal with the person. We want to make that person feel, and sorry, deal is a bit harsh. I don't mean it like deal in a negative way. I mean, we want to address, we want to respond to the person as a human before jumping into the facts. Anyhow, that is point number 2, is that ChatGPT is very good at acknowledging the person, the emotion, the work that has been done, in a way that I think we can learn from as humans. I think we sometimes skip that step. And interestingly enough, I don't know about you, but I found that working as a lawyer in particular, there was a lot of emphasis on being productive, on getting things right, on focusing on the facts over the emotions. And so I've trained myself away from a lot of attributes that I would consider more human, things like being more emotional. And so what ChatGPT is really inviting or allowing, in my view, is that it's allowing us to actually lean more into the humanness, the emotional part, and maybe focus a little bit less on having to be the machine. The machine is now doing the work of a machine. We get to do the things that are a little bit more human. And I'll, again, say a bit more about that later. So we're asking better questions. We are engaging in a more empathetic response. We're acknowledging that person. The third thing that ChatGPT does extremely well is it offers next steps. This is something you probably heard as a student, as a law student starting out in a law firm, as a junior lawyer. You've probably heard it if you've ever been to a marketing lesson where you're figuring out how to work better with your clients. And by this, I mean your external clients, because at the beginning, your clients are other lawyers. As you grow your practice and your clients are external clients, those are the people that you're serving. And so chances are you've heard the advice that you should be offering to help, asking about next steps, giving them options, building on relationships you already have. So this idea of offering next steps is something that we've probably all been told that we should do. Some of us may actually do it. We may do it in some situations and not in others, but ChatGPT does this for me routinely. And I didn't notice it so much at the beginning, but I've really started to notice it recently. And I've noticed that it will usually give me a very specific question. Oh, I see that you're doing a presentation. You've asked me about this topic. Would you like me to prepare a draft slide deck? Would you like me to prepare a 1-page talking sheet? Would you like me to explore questions? Or it will ask me. It'll ask me very specific questions about what else it could be doing that will build on the question and the exchange that we have just had. So if you are thinking about the way that you work with others, whether these are people that you are serving, these are your clients, what are some specific next steps that you might be able to help with? And maybe also if you're thinking about other people that you're just having a conversation with, what do you want to do for next steps? So I'm thinking about maybe a friend where you go and have a nice lunch date and maybe you think, this was really fun. Let's make a date on the calendar. Let's put a date in the calendar. Maybe it's 3 months from now so that we know that we'll have a chance to see each other again. So just this idea of next steps, and ChatGPT does this really well. Now, you may not know what the next steps might be. And often ChatGPT will offer me something that I didn't even think about. And I think, that would be a great idea. I'd love to have that. Sometimes it'll offer something that isn't really something that I want. And so I'll think, no, I don't really need that. And sometimes it just reminds me that there are next steps. So if you're thinking about this at a practical level and how you can do this with humans, is you could say, I noticed that we have just finished doing all the research. And so the next stage is for us to move on to the opinion letter that we're sending to the client. Would you like me to take a first draft or create a first draft of what that could look like? Or would you like me to create an outline of the key points I think we should make in that letter? So you might offer something specific, and to capture anything that maybe you're not asking for specifically, or any other steps. Or you might say, what do you think the next steps are? Or what did you anticipate would be the follow-up step? Because I'd love to help with that. So this can be a conversation. This doesn't have to be you offering point bullet A, B, or C. And if those don't appeal, then your involvement isn't at an end. So you might think about how you phrase that question. But this idea of offering to help and making it specific and doing it systematically really is effective. So I'm definitely learning from ChatGPT and trying to get better at doing that. It's something that I do sometimes really well, but not always. Next steps. That was point number 3. Point number 4, I think is very relevant, especially if you're out there in a world where you're being asked to provide answers to questions. And the question, it comes back to the question itself may be broad. And so the amount of information that you are coming back with is broad. The lesson is don't overload the person that you're trying to help with information. This, I think, is highly relevant to anybody who has been asked to research the answer to a legal question, because the reality is, at least my experience was that there's usually so much information. I mean, sometimes you come back with nothing, and that in itself is challenging. But if you're diving into an area where there's so many different angles that you could take, different approaches, different roads, different nuances, etc., is that sometimes it can be hard to discern what belongs inside the email, the report, the research memo, whatever, and what does not belong in it. And this is a skill. You think of materiality. This is a skill that lawyers develop over time. And as a junior lawyer, it's harder than when you are a more senior lawyer. But really that act of discernment, of distilling down the key information, is critical to being an effective lawyer advocate, because there is so much out there, and yet you need to be able to focus on the key pieces that actually really matter. So ChatGPT, I love you. And sometimes the responses are so big, the information is so vast and complete that it's overwhelming to me. I look at the screen and I think there's no way that I can deal with this. Now, with ChatGPT, it's relatively straightforward, because you can say to ChatGPT, this is great. I'd love something more concise. Can you please distill this into the 3 most important bullet points and send that to me? So that's a way you can skin that cat. What a horrible expression, but there you go. Anyways, thread the needle using ChatGPT. A bit harder to do with a human, right? Where you're processing 30 pages of case summaries, trying to figure out what the answer is. It's a bit of a different exercise, right? Can you do that in a split second the way that ChatGPT can do it? Probably not. Anyways, getting back to the point, and am I violating the rule as I speak it? Probably. This idea that more information is not necessarily going to help you. And so when you are communicating with other people, the key isn't to give all of the information. And believe me, this is something that I tend to do. Here I am trying to deliver more concise podcast episodes, because I find when I'm recording them, I get caught up. I want to share it all. So this is a skill I'm actively working on, and something that you might also be actively working on is thinking about how you take all the information that is out there. I mean, this is a real strength of ChatGPT. It's got access to so much information. And yet what we need usually is fairly precise. So as a communicator working with ChatGPT, working with humans, how can you distill the elements of communication down to the key points so that you're not overwhelming people with information? And what you might notice is, in terms of that volume of information, is number 1, whether you're asking the question or you're delivering the results, the solution, the answer, we want to be concise. We don't want all of the information. We want the relevant information. And so there's that element to it on both sides of the communication. The other thing is allowing time to process. And ChatGPT doesn't need a lot of time to process. I do. When ChatGPT sends me 2 pages of text and there's a lot in there and it's a topic I'm really interested about, and then there's this invitation for next steps, I sometimes really just need time to read it and reflect on it. I can't give an answer right away. That's part of being human. And that's not a bad thing, because what's happening during that time is I'm processing information. I will often achieve a deeper understanding of the information. I might see how there are connections between the conversation I'm having with ChatGPT relates to a different conversation, and I'm putting that together. If you sleep on a problem, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you have that clarity. There is science about how humans actually really benefit from the downtime when you're not actively thinking about a problem. Your unconscious mind is at work putting things together. And so we need time as humans to pause and reflect and digest. And so the flip side of that overload of information is also when you're working with other people, you need to give them time. If you're giving them a significant amount of information, they may need time to process that information. And for some people, it's a faster process than for others. But for most humans, there is some element of time that is required. And finally, that leads us to the last takeaway that I'm sharing with you today in terms of what I'm learning from working with ChatGPT that is helping me work better with humans. And this ties back to one of the offerings, or what I offered at the beginning, which is that I actually see ChatGPT, other forms of AI, taking over more routine type tasks as a good thing. Because says to me is that in the long run, what that will do is that it will make that type of labor relatively cheap. And what will become of relative value are things that are innately human, things that only humans can do, which is kind of fun because if I think about some of the things I've tried to do as a human, like be a good memorizer, be a good synthesizer, digest and process information, respond to an exam and get the questions right. I mean, sure, that's helpful. I think these are foundational skills that we should all develop and have. But if you're not spending your time doing those things, then what else can you do? And so this is where we get into this idea of humanness. Like, what is it that is innately human that AI hasn't replicated and may never replicate? Now, who knows where the world will go? We're 2025. Things are moving quickly, but here's what I have for now. Action versus knowledge. So ChatGPT or other AI can give you a ton of information. It can give you that base knowledge. But what's different about being human is actually implementing that knowledge. And this is where I see so much potential. It's one of the reasons that I coach. It's bringing people to the point of doing the things that they think and say and tell themselves that they want to do, but for whatever reason, they are not doing. When you're stuck, when you're scared, when you don't want to do it, that's when I can help you, right? Actually implement in action the things that you want to do, but haven't really been able to bring yourself to do. So relative to my beautiful friend, ChatGPT, I have a lot more influence in the world in the sense that I can actually take these ideas and implement them. So as a human, what can you implement? What actions can you take? What relationships can you build? What parties can you throw? What conversations can you have? What can you build with your hands? Those are all things that are actions that you can do as a human, the creativity of that, the process, the tangibility of that. So that now has a premium. Another human element that we bring that ChatGPT does not yet bring is emotion versus fact. Now, maybe ChatGPT, maybe AI can interpret emotion. It can clearly acknowledge emotion. It's done that with me. Does it feel anything? I don't think we're there yet, but then I'm not an expert. I use ChatGPT, but I don't know a ton about the behind the scenes. What I do know is that as humans, we have emotions, and often we're trying to manage our emotions because they're getting in the way. I feel scared, therefore I'm not going to do it. I feel nervous, therefore I'm going to procrastinate. I feel angry, therefore I'm going to lash out. And sometimes those emotions are really positive. I feel confident and excited. I'm going to go do it. I feel frustrated, so I'm going to go solve that problem. I feel inspired, so I'm going to take action. I feel love, so I'm going to make a connection with somebody. So we are driven by our emotions and we feel those emotions. One of the coolest things that I think is when I'm having a conversation with somebody, and sometimes it's in a coaching conversation, sometimes it's a regular with my friends, with my family, somebody at work conversation, and there's this tingle in my body about which is kind of like getting goosebumps or the shivers, whatever you want to call it. And it's almost like what somebody has said feels so profound. There's this emotional response. And you've had that too. I know you have. Maybe it's been listening to a beautiful note of music or something that somebody told you that just touched you in a way that was really deep. It was a real connection. I don't think that ChatGPT or its AI companions can feel the way that we can feel. And so that sense of what feels right, that sense of intuition with other humans, that ability to be human, to have those human emotions, that to me is an area where we can really lean into that. We can really develop that and prioritize that in our communications with humans so that our connections are better, our interactions are better, we work better with people. And then third, what ChatGPT doesn't have that we have is real life experience. So ChatGPT has all book knowledge in the world, but we are the ones who are experiencing the world. And funnily enough, what just came to mind for me is a scene in Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams' character is talking to Matt Damon's character. And Matt Damon is one of these savant type kids. I haven't seen the movie in years, but this scene did strike me and it's relevant here. And he has all his book knowledge. He's done a lot of reading, but he hasn't really lived a lot outside of the small community that he's in. And Robin Williams makes that point to him and he says, it's different. Being smart on paper versus experiencing life. It's a very different thing. And he talks about walking into the Sistine Chapel and the smell of it and the sight of it and the feel of it. And so when you think about what you can learn from AI, it's hugely valuable. But your personal experiences, that time that you talked to a client and they got really upset and you were able to stay with that conversation and tell them exactly what it was that they needed to hear in order to bring the temperature in the room down, in order to help them regain composure and decide on next steps, that's a real story. That's your experience. When you think about the stories of people that you've worked with, when they share experiences that they have had, and you can feel the emotion of what that was like for them, you can see them in that story, you can see yourself in your own version of that story. That's real life. I talked recently about this trip to Paris that I took with my daughter and with my husband, and just that is such an explosion of sensory stimulation, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, all of that. That is innately human. And so when you're communicating with people and you're talking about your real life experience of it, it is different from that thing that you read about in a book. It's different from what ChatGPT or other AI is able to offer you. And so that is what I'm encouraging you to think about in your communications with others, is that when you're working with them, you bring your experience, you bring your tangible experience to that conversation, to that relationship, and that has real value. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that I consulted ChatGPT. So just to summarize where we're at, the 5 takeaways from my perspective, 5 things that I've learned from ChatGPT that are helping me work better with humans are, number 1, really focusing on the questions that I'm asking and asking better questions, ones that are clear, ones that are giving me what I want or what I need. And so for you, I'm encouraging you to think about clarity of questions. A well-articulated problem is a problem half solved. The same is true of your questions. So let's ask really good questions. Number 2, we are acknowledging the human on the other side of the equation. We're acknowledging that connection, the emotion, the work, something about them that goes with this communication. So you might be reviewing your emails to make sure you're doing that. Where appropriate, you might be thinking about that as you approach a conversation with somebody. Are you starting that conversation with a conversation that forms connection? If that person is coming to you and they need emotional support more than they need your advice, as sage as your advice may be, we're starting with that. So we're focusing on acknowledging the person, acknowledging the emotion behind it, not it, but the conversation, the person versus the conversation. Number 3, we are offering next steps. So how can I help you? What is the follow-up here? Number 4, overloading information. So are we delivering the most relevant information as opposed to everything that is out there in relation to the topic? And then finally, we're leaning into that human element. What can you do that is innately human? currently, that means your actual work in the world, the actions that you take, the steps, the things that move the needle forward. It's leaning into your emotion versus relying solely on the facts. And then finally, it's sharing your own personal experiences and stories and the tangible experience you have of living in the real world as opposed to this AI world. So I asked ChatGPT. I decided, wouldn't it be fun if I actually had a conversation with ChatGPT about the fact that I'm going to do a podcast episode? So I did that. And I wrote into ChatGPT. I shared the first 2 points. I actually didn't want to share the part about too much information, and I didn't want to share the point about humanness because I didn't want ChatGPT to feel bad, which is weird. But anyways, so I just gave it the first 3 points: ask better questions, acknowledge the person, and offer next steps. And I asked ChatGPT, what do you think we can learn to work better among us as humans from working with you? And it gave me a list, 8 tips in particular. Now, I'm not going to go through all 8 tips because that would take a long time, but I did want to highlight that on that first list, and yes, there's a second list, some of the things that it highlighted is the value of active feedback. And it said to me, you often tell me, this is perfect, but can you add X? Which I thought was really interesting, that ChatGPT is giving me feedback and using my specific language. And it said that feedback loop sharpens results. With humans, continuous feedback, kind, specific, timely, strengthens relationships and output, which I thought was really cool. It highlighted balancing efficiency with connection. It says, I can deliver information instantly, but what makes the interaction satisfying for you is tone, empathy, and encouragement. Same goes for humans. Efficiency without connection feels transactional. Now, is ChatGPT saying that to me because that's how I am, or is it all humans? I don't know, but interesting. And then know when to stop and digest. So you regularly say, this is interesting because I've told you this and I've told this apparently to ChatGPT. I forgot about this. That's perfect for now. Let me digest it. Humans too need space to pause, reflect, and integrate before moving on. Respecting that makes working together less overwhelming. Super interesting. Now I mentioned there were 8 points that ChatGPT gave me. And so I asked it to give me 3 because I thought, well, I'll just make it shorter. I'll just share 3 points, the 3 highlights. So it did that. And interestingly, on the first bounce, it came back with the same 3 points, slightly modified, that I shared with you at the beginning. This idea of better questions, the idea of offering next steps, the idea of acknowledging the person. And so I said, that's great, but can you share with me that these are points I already plan to share in the podcast episode? What else do you think is important? And so it came back with 3, and I'm going to share those with you as well. So the first was, and first of all, listen to ChatGPT's response. Got it. Since you're already covering asking better questions, acknowledgement, encouragement, and clarity with next steps, here are the next top 3 that would really add depth and freshness to your podcast. Listen deeply. This is point 1. Listen deeply without rushing to respond. With me, silence doesn't feel awkward. I wait, in quotations, while you clarify. Translating that to humans, giving people some real space to think and finish before jumping in, fosters trust and better understanding. So I thought that was really interesting. Listen deeply without rushing to respond. This is so true, right? Think of the times where people have just let you talk, explain, giving you that space. It feels so good and it leads to better communication. Number 2, iterating instead of expecting perfection. So this ties back to a point about questions. I mentioned at the beginning, you want to phrase a good question. And what will often happen, and with ChatGPT, you'll see right away if you've asked an unclear question because of the response you get. It takes longer with people. In the example I gave, it could take weeks or days, and the person comes back and they clearly haven't understood the question because of what they've delivered in response. With ChatGPT, you'll see right away if you need a more precise response to a particular part of the question, if it's really a different question that you're asking, if there's one part of the answer that you want to follow up on, etc. So this ties into your question asking. It's an iterative process. You can refine the questions as you go, get more specific about what it is you need. And so this ties in with the second point that ChatGPT highlighted here, which is iterating instead of expecting perfection. And I love what it says here. Our conversations work best when you try something, see what lands, and refine. With humans too, collaboration improves when you treat ideas as drafts rather than final products. Thank you, ChatGPT. And third, and finally, the last point here that ChatGPT came up with in terms of how working with it makes us better at working with each other. at customizing communication to the other person. So it says to me, which is so interesting, you often adjust your tone, detail, or format with me, e.g. concise versus expansive. Doing the same with humans, meeting them where they are makes interactions smoother and more effective. And then the final sort of summary here is together, these 3 highlight how we work with others in the moment, complementing the what you already planned to share. And then, would you like me to sketch a loose outline with talking points and examples for these so that your podcast flows like a cohesive story? So there it is, giving me that offering for a next step. So all of this to say, we have so much to learn. We have so much to learn about working with AI. And what I love is the idea that we can actually, very meta, learn how to work with each other better by the way that we work with AI. And so I invite all of you to think about, number 1, how you are able to use AI potentially in the work that you do. And it isn't necessarily your legal work, right? It's not answering a legal problem, but it could be a case summary or structuring your day better or thinking about a career plan. I mean, there's all sorts of uses for AI, ChatGPT. So how are you engaging, if you're engaging at all? And if you choose not to, I respect that 100%. I'm finding it useful for the things that I mentioned. So number 1, how can we use it to support ourselves? And I think I mentioned already feedback. I think that's a really neat tool. If you can seek feedback, I think we're often afraid to seek feedback from humans. We can get that feedback from AI and it feels useful. You might not find all of it useful, but some of it will be. I'm sort of totally going on a tangent, so I'll stop. But think about how you are using or how you might use AI and how you're engaging with it. How are you getting the most out of it? And then the second piece, which is really the thrust of today, is what can we learn about that as we practice almost on machines? We practice our skills with machines. How can we translate what we're learning, both from the role that we play in that interaction and also the way that the AI is responding? What can we learn from that iteration, those interactions that we can apply to the way that we work with each other so that we have better communication, we have stronger connections, we're better able to collaborate with each other and create what it is that we're ultimately trying to create together, what we're trying to build. So with that, I wanted to thank you for joining me here today. I'm so excited to have you here. If you have any comments or thoughts or uses for AI that you'd love to share, please do. I'm so curious. And I just really enjoyed connecting with you this week. So happy to chat about anything. Here's the next step, right? I mean, if you're listening to the podcast, you listened to the podcast for a while, and you're thinking about something you'd like some help with. You've been to ChatGPT and you know exactly the steps you need to take, but you're not taking them, and you'd like some help making those steps, taking the tangible actions. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to help you and support you with that. If you're, working with teams and you would like somebody to come in and facilitate a discussion, then by all means, I can do that. So there's my ChatGPT inspired offer of next steps. I'd love to stay in touch. So I'll see you. I'll hopefully see you again next week. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to our next chat. Bye for now.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.